From the Alabama News Network, this is Your Community This Week on ABC 32.
Hello everyone and welcome to Your Community This Week. I'm Mandy McQueen. Today we'll be talking with Sylvia Dunn to discuss heart health and cardiac rehab, and that's a little later in the show. But first I'm joined by Dr. Richard Bailey to discuss Black History Month. So thank you so much for joining me today, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, and you've been on the show before, and I know you've been very busy throughout the month of February, several engagements and observances you've been doing. But how did Black History Month get started in the first place?
Well, first of all, Negro History Week was established in 1926 by Carter G. Woodson and the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in Washington, D.C. In 1976, President Gerald Ford authorized the establishment and expanding it to the entire month of February. So we got Black History Month starting in 1976.
Now, why did they choose February?
I'm glad you asked that question, as many people would say. First of all, February was chosen because it is a month when we had Negro History Week. That week embraced the birth dates of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass.
Okay.
That was why February was chosen.
See, I've always wondered that. Wow,
yes.
Okay. And you've had several speaking engagements throughout the month of February. Can you kind of talk to me a little bit about what all you've done so far?
Well, first of all, I've spoken at a college in the state of Alabama, not in here in Montgomery, and I talked about African Americans in the Alabama Bicentennial, dealt with all of these well-known persons, male and female, who had ties to the state of Alabama. And then at a public library here in Montgomery, I spoke on African Americans and the vote, the theme for Black History Month, still focusing on the Alabama Bicentennial. And last week, I spoke at the Alabama Department of Archives and History on Horace King, the person who built the staircase in the Capitol here. And later this month, I'll speak on the history of one of our now defunct high schools here in the city of Montgomery.
Yes, sir. And what's the theme for this year, or the topic for this year for Black History Month?
The theme for this year is African American and the vote.
Okay. And what does that mean, and why was that chosen?
Well, first of all, what it means is 2020 represents the centennial for the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, the amendment that gave women the right to vote, and it represents also the 150th anniversary of the passage of the 15th Amendment in February of 1870.
Okay, so a lot of importance behind that. And I know a big thing is, trying to get the younger generation to vote, but how important is it to get, younger African Americans to vote as well, and to encourage that?
Yes, it's very important that even some adults continue to vote.
Yeah. When
you look at the history and the sacrifices that people have made to ensure that we get the right to vote, then I think the job becomes easier. We need to understand that women, for example, haven't always had the right to vote in this country. And even Black men haven't always had the right to vote. Yeah. Black men received the right to vote with the 15th Amendment, and women, Black and white, with the 19th Amendment in 1920. And I just want to emphasize that were it not for the Reconstruction Act of March 2nd, 1867, Black men would not have voted for the first time in this country. And the first Black voters in the state of Alabama were those voters who went to the polls or went to the election site in Tuscumbia, Alabama, on April the 1st, 1870. And the first Black woman to vote in Montgomery was Henrietta Gibbs in 1921, 1 year after the passage of the 19th Amendment.
Wow. Now, I know, Martin Luther King Jr., he's a huge icon in the civil rights movement, but who sticks out in your mind as well, other than Martin Luther King, for Black History Month?
Well, first of all, there are so many persons who pop into my head. For example, the first Black congressman in this state, Benjamin Turner, the first Black millionaire. I can just go on down the line, and the reason I'm hesitating here, I don't want to give a preference so that a person will assume this is the only person we should talk about. Yeah. Jackie Robinson in baseball, Satchel Paige in baseball, Willie Mays, Percy Julian in science, George Washington Carver in science. And then voting rights here in the state of Alabama. Charles G. Gomillion at Tuskegee Institute and the TCA there with the case of Gomillion versus Lightfoot, 1960, that Supreme Court case that dealt with gerrymandering that was taking place in our neighboring county of Macon. And Mr. Lightfoot was the mayor of the city. But there are just so many person. That's the reason I write books and give speeches, and especially my They Too Call Alabama Home book, because in that book I have 393 profiles. And in one of the appendices, I list the persons in that book by occupation and by geography. But we don't want to overlook anybody who has made a significant contribution, and even some of the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement. For example, when we start talking about voting rights for women, Indiana Little, 1926, Birmingham, Alabama school teacher who was very interested in ensuring that women received the right to vote. And then even with the march from Selma to Montgomery, we don't want to overlook persons such as Jonathan Daniels in Hayneville, and Reverend James Reed in Selma, and Miss Viola Lauzzo, moving from Montgomery back to Selma on March 25th, 1965.
And I hate to cut you off right there. We've got to take a break real quick, but we're going to continue to talk about all that coming up in just a moment, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Your Community This Week continues in just a moment. Welcome back. With us on Your Community This Week is Dr. Richard Bailey to discuss Black History Month. He's an author and a historian, so we're going to talk a little bit about your books in just a moment. But before the break, we were talking really about some, keynote personalities. A lot of people, of course, they're familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but you were telling us some, and we were talking about the Selma to Montgomery march as well. But I know there's so many, pioneers in different things, such as sports, Black history in sports, and also with the astronauts as well. So I'll let you continue on some of those keynote personalities that you were talking about.
Well, first of all, we just want people to know there are countless individuals to discuss in Black History Month. And the second thing we want people to embrace is that we don't have to restrict a discussion regarding African American contribution to February. We can do it year round. And we want to include in that discussion the likes of Macy Jemison, astronauts, and talk about the history of our colleges and universities in the state of Alabama, the Booker T. Washingtons of Tuskegee, the H. Council Trenthams of Alabama State, the William H. Councils of Alabama A&M, the Arthur Grays of Talladega College, if you get what I'm saying. Many of these giants in the field of education, and the A.G. Gaston in business. We want to ensure that we talk about all of these people. And then our attorneys, the Fred Grays, the Arthur Shores, and countless others who have done magnificent work. And we don't want people to minimize the contribution of any of these people. And that's what African American history is, to ensure that the playing field become level when we begin to talk about the contribution of our people.
And I know you were talking about you've had several speaking engagements. What's maybe your keynote message when you go and speak to people about Black History Month? Well,
one of the things I mentioned to an audience when I spoke at a college in the state the first week in February, I ended my presentation by saying this. A young lady last year approached me and asked me, how do you give a good speech? And I said, among some other things, number one, you prepare well, and you fall in love with your audience. When you're talking about African American history, we want to ensure that, first of all, you get your facts straight, and secondly, that you can deliver the message so that people will understand the contribution of these people. When people talk about, for example, a Percy Julian, we want people to know this man was a giant in his field, and that he's from right here in Alabama. And one of the things I have noticed over time is that when a person is born in Alabama and goes elsewhere, sometimes people forget that person was born in Alabama, and they talk about all of the contribution that person has made, but Alabama does not come into the picture. And what I try to do, when I talk Black history, I talk Alabama Black history, so that people will know these persons have ties to the great state of Alabama.
Do you go speak in other states as well to talk about Alabama Black history?
I have spoken as far away on the west as Portland, Oregon, as far away as the east as I guess Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I speak all the time, and also speak on the black church, especially the 19th century black church, to let people know that when we came out of slavery, several things we tried to do: stabilize the family, acquire an education, and we built our churches. And many of the churches in this state were actually established in the 19th century. There are some afterwards, but many of our churches were established in the 19th century.
Yes, sir. Now, we also mentioned before that you're an author as well, and you have several
Yes.
books out there. Talk to me about some of the books you have.
Well, my first book was Neither Carpetbaggers Nor Scalawags, Black Office Holders During the Reconstruction of Alabama, 1867 to 1878. And this is when I began to talk about these early black churches, these early black office holders, these early black banks in the state of Alabama, and all of that. And it is amazing what African Americans did in the state of Alabama in the 19th century.
Wow, okay. And where can people purchase your books or find them?
Well, they can purchase them just about anywhere around town. New South Books, they can go to Landmarks Foundation, they can go to the archives, they can go on the internet and publish these books.
Now, I know you have that one. Do you have some other ones as well?
That They Too Call Alabama Home
They do,
book,
okay.
they can purchase that book from some of the same places.
Perfect. And you know, we were talking about the theme for this year being, you know, African American in the vote again, and that's a very important topic. What would you say to people, real quick? You know, as important elections are coming up, what would you say to them?
You have the freedom to vote. Exercise it. Don't take the right to vote for granted.
Right.
It is a sacred opportunity, and plus it's legal. And if you don't vote,
Yeah.
you can't complain.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Doctor. You've had a bunch of great information for us, and thank you for your time on watching Your Community this week on ABC 32. In a few minutes, we'll chat with Ms. Sylvia Dunn to discuss heart health and cardiac rehab, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Ms. Sylvia Dunn this morning on ABC 32, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Of course, and you obviously are you know a lot about heart health in February. I know we were talking about that last week. It's Heart Health Month, right?
It is.
Okay, so we've got Black History Month and as well as Heart Health Month. So we're going to talk about ways to stay healthy and also some cardiac rehabilitation as well. But first of all, to kind of kick things off for people who may don't have any experience with this, what exactly is the heart disease and what all does that obtain?
Okay. Heart disease is kind of a broad category, but basically it is buildup of plaque in the vessels that supply the muscles of the heart. The heart's a muscle just like any other muscle and has to have that blood supply, and when plaque starts building up, then the blood supply is not there like it should be. And so a lot of times when you exercise, you start having chest pain or tightness, and a lot of times women don't have the same symptoms as men. And women sometimes will have back pain or jaw pain or shoulder pain, just fatigue sometimes, just vague symptoms. So it's really important that you know what those symptoms are, and a lot of times you have it with exercise when the heart's demanding that oxygen and not getting it, and then it'll go away when you rest. So those are some red flags to kind of look out for.
And what are the most common symptoms? Is that one of them, and then are there any more too?
Well, like I said, women are different than men. Yeah. Men a lot of times have that classic, what you see in the movies, that chest pain, grabbing, tightness, or elephant sitting on the chest. Women oftentimes don't have that. Theirs is a little bit different. And sometimes there may be no symptoms at all.
Well, and I know obviously we've heard a lot that exercise and eating healthier ways to prevention, but kind of digging a little bit deeper, how can people really prevent heart disease?
The best thing you can do is when you go in the grocery store, shop the perimeter of the grocery store. Get your fresh fruits and vegetables, your lean meats, your low-fat dairy, and then go out the front door. And don't go up and down the aisles with the processed foods, because a lot of times they have salt and fat and sugar in those processed foods, and those are not our friend.
Right, and you, we were talking about this before we went on, that you have a little bit of experience as well, being a heart patient. So for those who may be, having to deal with this, what would be your advice to them?
Don't ignore your symptoms. I started having chest pain and ignored my symptoms for over 2 weeks. I went to the doctor, got a heart cath. Well, I first had a stress test, failed miserably, was on the treadmill for less than a minute. The nurse sat me down, got the doctor, and gave me some nitro. told me to be at the hospital the next morning for a heart cath. They found blockage that they could not repair with a heart cath, and had open heart surgery the next morning.
Wow. And what was that experience like for you?
Well, I want to say it was kind of scary, but it was so quick that it really, wasn't scary. I knew in the back of my mind, that was coming because I was having those chest pain, and I was a nurse, so I knew when I took the nitro, that the doctor gave me and made me feel good, that was a bad sign. So it was a little scary, but I got great care, got back on my feet. I actually went to cardiac rehab after my surgery. I wasn't working in that department at the time. But I went to cardiac rehab after my surgery, got back on my feet, and went back to work.
Wow. So what's the next step after you have something like that? Is cardiac rehab the next step after that healing process?
It is. I like to kind of equate cardiac rehab to physical therapy. After you've had hip replacement, you go to physical therapy. Same thing with your heart. After you've had a heart event, you're going to get the best outcomes if you go to cardiac rehab afterwards. We're going to develop an exercise program that's specifically for you. Doesn't matter how old you are, what exercise history you've had, anything like that. We develop a specific exercise program just for you. We have nurses on staff, RNs on staff all the time. We have emergency response equipment. If something were to happen while you're there, we can take care of you. And we also do a lot of education. We talk about what is heart disease, how to prevent it, heart healthy eating, exercise, stress, all those things.
Perfect, and we're going to talk more about that coming up after the break, so stay with us. Your Community This Week on ABC 32 continues in just a moment. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Sylvia Dunn on Your Community This Week, and we're continuing our conversation on heart health. And before the break, though, we had already talked about a little bit about cardiac rehab, and you're saying, that is an important step to the healing process, but what all is involved in it exactly?
Well, when you first start, you're going to meet one-on-one with one of our nurses. She's going to do an assessment and sort of evaluate you and talk to you about your history and those kind of things. And then we'll take you out. We do, it's kind of an evaluation. We do a 6-minute walk. We see how far you can walk in 6 minutes. That gives us some idea of your functional ability. And then you will work with one of our exercise physiologists, typically on developing a exercise program. We have treadmills, a couple of different bicycles. We have sit-down exercises for people that aren't able to do treadmills. We have a lot of different equipment that we use. It looks like a regular gym when you walk by and look in the window.
Right.
After we do that, you do have education. We have TVs in the gym that play educational videos. We have the pharmacy students come over and talk about medications. The dietitians come over and talk to you about heart healthy eating. It's a complete program.
Right. And how long does it take to go through the program?
Okay. Insurance covers our program, and most insurance companies cover 36 sessions, and we recommend exercising with us 3 to 5 days a week. So the program typically lasts about 12 to 18 weeks.
Perfect. And talk to me a little bit about what the benefits are with this.
The biggest benefit to coming to cardiac rehab is you're less likely to die. It reduces your risk of another heart event. It increases your length of life. It increases your functional ability. It increases your mental capacity. I mean, we do mental health scores because having somebody work on your heart is kind of a scary thing.
Right.
And it helps to be with other people that have had the same event happen and to see that, hey, they're getting better. Or even myself, it's been a long time since mine, and, I'm doing good.
So it's kind of a support group, I guess.
It is. It really is. That's a huge part. Our patients get to know each other. They swap phone numbers. They come at the same time every day, and we have little get-togethers, that kind of thing. So it's a social event as well.
Is it often, once people go through rehab and everything, do you see many maybe having a relapse or of any sort?
We do on occasion see people that have another event, because a lot of the risk factors, or some of the risk factors, are not modifiable. Your advancing age, your family history, those things we can't do much about, but we do what we can to keep that from happening.
Perfect. And I know we talked a little bit about ways to prevent it, and obviously exercise and eating healthy. As far as exercising going, do you have advice on how much you should exercise and what you should do?
Well, I don't, because I don't know everybody's history.
Yeah.
We like to evaluate everybody before we prescribe an exercise program, just to make sure they're safe. The other thing that we do with all of our patients is put them on a heart monitor when they first start. We can watch their heart rate and their heart rhythm, just to kind of make sure they're stable and well enough to exercise.
Is there a certain age that you're more at risk for heart disease?
Well, your risk increases with age. That's one of the risk factors we can't do anything about.
Yeah.
And like I said, the family history is another thing.
Right.
Smoking is another huge risk factor.
Yes.
If you smoke, the best thing you can do to prevent a heart event is to stop.
Right. Okay, well, thank you. A lot of great information, and thank you for watching. And remember, if you have a guest or topic suggestion, then grab a pencil. We'll tell you how to send us the information next on Your Community This Week. Welcome back to Suggest a Guest for Your Community This Week. Contact our producer, Lois Crenshaw. Her email address is lcrenshaw@allen.tv, or you can call her, that number on your screen, 334-649-1071. Well, that's going to wrap it up for us this Sunday on Your Community This Week. We'll see you again next week. Until then, have a great work week, everyone.